Hello and welcome back. In this video we'll discuss how to analyze and understand the stakeholders we've already identified in the first step. If you have missed the first video which discusses the importance of stakeholders and how to identify them, follow the link added in the description section. I highly recommend watching it before moving on. The first step in stakeholder management was to identify the project stakeholders. Stakeholder identification should happen as early as possible in the project's life, because it is the stakeholder requirements that determine the scope of the project and other constraints. And as we've seen before, the requirements of the stakeholders that are discovered late will be in the form of change requests. This will cause your project to be delayed and the cost of the project to increase. And you don't want that to happen, of course. The second step after identifying the stakeholders would be basically to understand and analyze them. So what is stakeholder analysis? Stakeholder analysis is a method of systematically gathering and analyzing quantitative and qualitative information to determine whose interests should be taken into account throughout the project. This definition summarizes the whole process. We are going to collect data, both descriptive and mathematical, related to the stakeholders, and use this data to know which stakeholder is of more importance to the project. I'd just like to draw your attention that in pmbok 6th edition, identification and analyzing stakeholders are both part of one process, which is identify stakeholders. It is the first process in project stakeholder management area of knowledge. In pmbok 7th edition, however, it is a separate step in the stakeholder performance domain. So don't get confused. Now let's see, what are the aspects we need to analyze in stakeholders? It's important first to determine the level of interest each stakeholder has in the project. Does the stakeholder care about the project? Is he likely to be engaged? If an internal stakeholder has great interest in the project, his engagement would add greater value to the project if he is included. You may find, for example, an internal stakeholder especially interested in working on a particular part of your project to learn new skills or prove his skills to his superior. Engaging him and adding him to your team is a good idea. This particular stakeholder will put a lot of effort because he has an interest in the project. The same goes to external stakeholders. Imagine you're planning for an environmental project and there is an environmentally active group in the town. Approaching them and engaging them with the work would be a great idea. They will contribute so much to the project's success. A great project manager will determine each stakeholder's interests related to the project, and will structure the work, determine roles, and assign responsibilities to maximize engagement. The power of stakeholders should be analyzed parallel to their interest in the project. The more powerful is the stakeholder, whether he is internal or external, the more effort you should put to engage him. If he's powerful and interested in your project, he is already a great asset you have to use. If he's powerful but not interested, you should work on attracting him to the project, sometimes even aligning the project's outcome to match his expectations or interest just to attract him. This sounds like bribery, but it is an ethical form of bribery if it serves the project's success. Some stakeholders might not have the power or authority in their organizations, but they might display some leadership skills and have some influence over others. The influence of interested stakeholder must be addressed to see if it is negative or positive towards your project, and if possible, use it in your favor. It's true to say that the importance of the stakeholder is measured by his power, interest, and influence. The proximity of the stakeholder to the project, however, increases the effect of these aspects. Therefore, proximity, or how close is the stakeholder to the project environment, should be also taken into consideration when analyzing the stakeholders. Stakeholders that work in the organizations involved in the project are closer to the project, hence, more powerful, more interested, and more influential than external ones. The impact of the project outcomes on the stakeholders should be analyzed too. If the stakeholder realizes the impact of the project on him, this will drive him to use his power and influence in what serves him, and this is normal. If he's impacted negatively, like a competitor for example, he will be a great threat to the success of your project. Make sure to watch for those. On the other hand, stakeholders who will be impacted positively are viewed as an opportunity. This impact must be clarified to them, because if they're not aware of that, you're losing a good soldier who can fight for your project. The beliefs and attitudes of stakeholders form a basis for you to understand what will be their behavior towards your project. A hardcore aggressive environmentalist, for example, will fight for your project if your project's outcome is environmentally friendly. And he will fight against you if it is not. So make sure you understand the disposition of the stakeholders towards your project and their demeanor. Not all stakeholders are alike. They have different expectations and needs. One must engage every stakeholder uniquely according to his needs, or else the stakeholder might feel left out. Remember that different stakeholders often have opposing expectations that might create conflicts within the project. That's why, as you will see, the next step after we finish analysis would be to prioritize the stakeholders. Make sure to analyze all these properties: power, interest, influence, impact, beliefs and attitude, expectations and proximity. This analysis should be performed on all stakeholders you have identified in the earlier step. You might be overwhelmed with the number of stakeholders you've already identified, because in some projects you might have thousands and there is no time in the world to analyze all of them. That's why you can do the following to narrow down the number of stakeholders before you start to analyze them. You can narrow down the number of stakeholders by focusing on the ones with authority over other stakeholders. For example, if the whole accounting department are stakeholders in your upgrading accounting software project, you might want to focus on the chief accountant rather than the junior accountants. I am not saying you should totally ignore them, but don't spend too much time on every single one. Another strategy you can use is to group the stakeholders with similar interests and address the most influential in the group. For example, if you're executing an infrastructure project in a populated area, all residents are stakeholders. But you might not be able to address them all at once. See who's the most popular and influential in the group, and he will be representative of the group. You could even ask them to nominate or elect a representative who speaks in their name. You can also schedule your analysis. Some stakeholders are to be involved at the early stages, others on a later stage. Start by analyzing the most urgent ones, and you can schedule the analysis of the rest to a later stage. Finally, you're not alone. You have team members that you're supposed to trust and rely on. Delegate some analysis work to them. But remember to put some ground rules and standards to follow, so all members' outcome can be compatible with each other and in the same format. No course will ever teach you how to understand stakeholders. It is like all soft skills: you learn, you practice, you master. You will find it hard at first, but with time, it will seem effortless. Here are some advices you can make use of. Pick up emotional cues, often from body language, tone of voice, and other nonverbal elements of communication. You can learn a lot about a person just from paying attention. Actively listen to what stakeholders are saying. This means that you have to listen attentively, understand what they're saying, respond and reflect on what's being said, and retain the information for later. This keeps both the stakeholder and you actively engaged in the conversation. Here are some tools, however, that you can use to collect information. Formal interviews is one tool you can use. But limit the interviews with key stakeholders because it is time-consuming. Questionnaires and surveys can be used with large groups and communities. Socializing and informal meetings are very helpful with secondary and even primary stakeholders. You can get a lot about the preferences, interests, attitude and beliefs from coffee breaks and informal lunch meetings. Understanding the politics and power structures in the involved organizations is a good source of information, especially when it comes to understanding the power of stakeholders. Knowledge of the environment and culture of the involved organization and other affected organizations, including customers and the wider environment. These are all tools and sources of information you can use to know the stakeholders' aspects and understand them properly in your analyzing quest. I have to wrap up this video because we've already taken too much time. If you want to follow on with our series, please make sure to subscribe to our channel. The next video will discuss how to make use of all the collected information and transform them into numbers that we can use to prioritize the stakeholders. If you have any suggestion on how to improve our videos or requests to discuss any topic, please write it down in the comment section. All comments are welcome and will be answered as soon as possible. In the meantime, have a good day.